All right, please forgive the nails. You know the nail salons are not open. All right, some anatomy. So down here, this is the distal phalanx. This is the middle phalanx, and this is the proximal phalanx. All four of these digits have all three of those, but the first digit only has a distal phalanx and a proximal phalanx. All right, joints. That joint is an IP joint, and that joint is an IP joint, which stands for interphalangeal. But because there's two of them, you have to let the radiologist know which one. So this one is furthest from the trunk, so this is the distal interphalangeal joint, or the dip. This one is proximal to the trunk, so it is the proximal interphalangeal joint, or the PIP. Now over here on the first digit, there's only a distal phalanx and only a proximal phalanx. So this joint right here is just an interphalangeal joint, or an IP. So we got dips, pips, and one IP. All right, these are your metacarpals. Oh, and by the way, every one of these has a head, body, base. Head, body, base. All of these do. Then we get down here to the metacarpals, which has a head, a body, and a base. But these joints right here are the MCP joints, which stands for metacarpal phalangeal joint. So this is the first MCP, second MCP, third MCP, fourth MCP, fifth MCP. Head of the fifth metacarpal, body of the fifth metacarpal, base of the fifth metacarpal. Now the joints between the carpals and the metacarpals are called the carpometacarpals, or the CMCs. So there's the fifth CMC, the fourth CMC, the third CMC, and the first CMC. All right, so now looking at the carpals, I'm going to flip this around. So this is number one right here, starting with the scaphoid. And we know that it is part of the wrist joint because it articulates with the radius. Also, it's important because it is the largest in the proximal row. It's not the largest of all because that's the capitate, but it is the largest in the proximal row. It is also the most commonly fractured carpal. Then number two is the lunate. The only thing we talk about with that is that it also articulates with the radius, so it is part of the wrist joint. Next one, number three, is the traquetrum. And we don't say anything about the traquetrum, except that the pisiform is sitting on top of the triquetrum. So the pisiform is anterior to it. And he is pissed because he is the smallest carpal. Also, he has to sit on her lap. Then we go back over here in the distal row, starting laterally, because the thumb is lateral. This one is the trapezium. Then we have the trapezoid. And what do we say about the trapezoid? It is the smallest in the distal row. The pisiform is the smallest of all, but trapezoid is the smallest in the distal row. Then we have the capitate, which is the largest of all. The scaphoid is the largest in the proximal row, but capitate largest of all. And then we have the hamate, and what's special about it is it has this little hook-like process on it called the hamulus. Now, the trapezium articulates with the first metacarpal. The trapezoid articulates with the second metacarpal. The capitate articulates with the third. And the hamate articulates with the fourth and the fifth. All right, moving on to the radius and ulna. Here is your radius. There's the radial styloid process. Over here is the ulnar notch. And we know that because this is the ulnar head, and that's going to sit in the ulnar notch to form the distal radial ulnar joint. This is the shaft of the radius. And then we come over here, we have the radial tuberosity is this little lumpy area. We have the radial neck and the radial head. I think that's it on the radius. Yep. Now going over to the ulna, this is the ulnar styloid process. Here's the ulnar head. Here is the shaft. And then up here, here's what we call the ice cream scooper. So here's the actual scooper, which is the trochlear or semilunar notch. The anterior part of the scooper is the coronoid process, and then the posterior part of it is the olecranon process. Over here on the side of the ulna, which side is it? By the pinky. So on the medial side, we have the coronoid tubercle. And inside here, you can see the little notch, and that is the radial notch because the radial head is going to sit in the radial notch, and that makes the proximal radial ulnar joint. All right, going back over here. On the distal humerus, this entire end right here is the condyle. Sorry, condyle. We have the little tiny lateral epicondyle, and we have the big medial epicondyle. Over here on the medial side, we have the trochlea, and down the center of it is the trochlear sulcus or groove. That's where this little piece is, and that's where the pulley is. And then over here on the medial side, we have the, no, that's the lateral side. Sorry, lateral side is the capitulum. So the capitulum looks like a ball, and the trochlea are these two notches right here. Now, when you flex your arm, your coronoid process is going to go into the coronoid fossa. Your radial head is going to go into the radial fossa. And on the posterior side, my arm is now flexed, but when I extend it, the olecranon process is going to go into the olecranon fossa. All right, one more little thing.